And all of a sudden, ordinary people from East Des Moines and Greenridge and Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, and places I went, all of a sudden, guess what? A lot of our fathers, not mine, but a lot of our fathers and mothers at those great institutions getting their great educations. And folks, look what's happening. We built this incredible country. Now what do you hear adults talking about? You hear adults talking about how we're losing our way. You hear adults talking about, you know, there's this big debate going on now. It's about whether or not we have too high a paid workforce. How can we compete with these other countries that they'll pay their people a whole lot less to do the same job? And so we're now in this false argument. This argument we're having among ourselves now is, do we have to basically lower our wages and get rid of unions and do those things in order to compete with India and China and all these other countries? Or you have other people on the other side saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're just not going to trade with those people. We're just not going to be engaged with them. So on the right and the left in American politics, you have this false debate going on. The debate is, look, in order to protect our jobs, we're not going to have trade agreements with anybody around the world. That's like saying I'm going to grow 600 acres of corn, but I'm not going to sell it outside of my county. You got to go where the buyers are. There used to be a bank robber named Willie Sutton. And they once asked Willie Sutton, he said, Willie, why do you rob banks? And he looked at the guy who asked him the question and said, because that's where the money is. Well, you know what? Why do we have to trade? That's where the market is. We're 300 million. They are several billion people out there. So what are we going to do about this? Because what you hear now, and I'm about to get to the program here, what you hear now is you hear people saying, well, you know what? Look at China. Look what China's doing. Look what India's doing. It used to be when someone called to remind you you had to pay your credit card, or call from Neiman Marcus, or call from Sears to say, you know, we got this sale. You'd have someone on the phone who was living in Des Moines making the call, getting paid to make the call. Now that person lives in Bangalore, India. Literally, in Bangalore, India. And guess what? All those jobs left. And then we also have a lot of people out there who are doing things like, for example, if you're playing a sport today and you do what's happened to my boys and my daughter and me playing ball, and you end up with a dislocated shoulder or a broken arm or a sprained ankle, they take you to the local hospital and get an x-ray, right? Well, guess what? You know who's reading those x-rays? They're reading those x-rays in India in an awful lot of hospitals. They're not having a technician in our hospital read that x-ray. They're having a guy or a woman making a fair amount of money in India. That x-ray gets sent to them. That MRI gets sent to them. They sit there and read it, sitting in an office in a part of the world you've never even heard of. And guess what? That means those medium-paying jobs, lab technicians, are going over there too. And so we sit here and say, my goodness, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, here's my point. We have to have as much of a revolution in the way we think about education in America as we had in 1900, as we had in the year 1946. Ladies and gentlemen, this really is about America's future, its security. How can we sustain ourselves internationally if we have a shrinking middle class? How can we sustain ourselves internationally if we are no longer the economic engine of the world? How can we maintain our standard of living? Because you know what's going to happen? What's going to happen if we don't make some radical changes? What's going to happen is the same thing that happened in those other countries. You'll have two-tiered society, a stratification in society. You'll still have very, very wealthy people. I go to Colombia often dealing with the drug trade. There's a very wealthy, non-drug dealing elite in India. In Colombia. And there's the rest. There's a very, very wealthy group of people in Mexico. And then there's the rest. Mexico's the second wealthiest country in the hemisphere. And that's the strata. Guess what's happened? While we're trying to catch up and figuring out how to deal with what we're going to do about the people who are the ones who are taking our call services and the manufacturing jobs that are repetitive, we're fighting that fight. That's not the fight. The fight is when they're going to start taking our engineers, when they're going to start designing our bridges, when our stock market moves there, when the Board of Trade moves there. Because guess what they're doing? Everything is fast forwarded now. I'll give you one example and I'll go to specifics. There's a guy named D'Onofrio who's the #2 guy at IBM. By the way, the single biggest export we export is not corn. I'm a big agriculture state, not chickens. Single biggest export we send out is information. That's the single biggest export America has. And here's the deal. He said he just came back from India. He's a friend of mine. We went to Syracuse. And he came back and he said, you know, everybody's worried about the call centers. They're worried about the call centers because the call centers are not their future. So what are they doing? They are now producing more engineers, more scientists, more well-educated people in larger and larger numbers than we are doing. They produced 3 or 4 times as many engineers last year as we did in the United States of America. They're starting to figure out, if not universal education, significantly higher training for their workforces. So the battle is on. The race is on. What do you do about it? Well, here's what I propose to do about it. Because I am absolutely, positively, unequivocally certain we can make the 21st century the American century, just like the 20th was. Not through the might of our military, which is incredible, but through the might of our minds and our education system. We're still the most innovative nation in the world. The greatest thing we have going is, and look in this audience, there's black, there's white, there's Hispanic, men, women. We are the most heterogeneous democracy in the history of the world, in the history of the world. That's our strength. That's the strength. All these new ideas colliding. That's what energizes this country. And so, folks, start off with a proposition stated by my mom. My mom says, as she's been saying from the time I've been a kid, Joey, children tend to become that what you expect of them. Children tend to become that what you expect of them. And we're not expecting enough of you. I expect much more. I expect much more. And I plan on as being the education president unlike any president has in American history. And the reason I say that is I believe absolutely positively that it is the key to our security, both economic, military, and political. And folks, here's what you got to do. Everybody knows the deal. And this is the boring part. If you weren't already bored. The students understand. First of all, you got to start kids at school early. You got to give them a better chance. You know, they talk about this education gap you guys hear about, and all these tests you have to take, you know, and whether you meet the minimum requirements of this thing called No Child Left Behind. And they talk about this gap existing between disadvantaged students and others. Well, guess what? Half of that gap exists before some kids even step foot in the classroom. And you know why? Because, in fact, it makes a big difference whether or not your mom, every day from the day you're born, speaks to you. Because if she does every day, you're going to have a vocabulary that's 300 words larger than someone whose mom speaks to them every single day. And you're going to start off in preschool in a circumstance you're already behind the curve. So we got to talk about, from the moment of birth, having society make available a lot of things that can help people educate their kids. I think we have to double, I say to those of you who are here for the specifics. We're going to have to, in my view, we can triple the amount of children we have in early Head Start, that's age 3, and we can double the number of people we have in Head Start. Doing both of those things, about $12 million a year.